I'm Joel Meskin, Vice President of Community Association Insurance and Risk Management. One of the most frequently asked questions that we get is not what is covered by a D&O policy, but what is not covered by a D&O policy. And this is really important because probably 50% of the claims that are submitted under the D&O policy for coverage end up not being covered. One thing that people need to understand is for there to be coverage under a D&O policy, which is a claims-made policy in almost every instance, is that there has to be a wrongful act, there has to be a claim where somebody is demanding that the association do or not do something, and that has to be reported to the carrier. So the key is what happens if a lawsuit is filed against the association but there's no allegation of a wrongful act? Most people say, how can you be sued if there's no allegation of a wrongful act? Well, they could be sued because in a lot of real estate issues, the association is what we call a necessary party, and that the action is really going against maybe one of the unit owners, but the association has to be included in that action for the judge to be able to, or a court to be able to make a determination. So the association committed no wrongful act, and just because an association is brought into a lawsuit doesn't necessarily mean that the D&O policy will respond. That is one of the key areas. More often, however, is there are certain exclusions that preclude coverage under a D&O policy. Most people would think that if a alleged incident damage occurred because it results from a community association board's decision, that it would be covered under the D&O policy. However, that is not the case in every instance. Not all consequential damage of the board's decisions are covered under the D&O policy. And the biggest exclusion that we see in that regard are with respect to claims for bodily injury or property damage. Very often a decision to possibly put speed bumps into a community association, and it turns out that these speed bumps are higher than are allowed by city ordinance, and as a result of that somebody is injured, we're not going to provide coverage for that under a D&O policy. And people say, well, that occurred because of their decision. However, we respond that, well, if you want us to write a policy that provides that type of coverage, it's going to be significantly more expensive. That's a coverage that very well could be covered under your general liability policy. Similarly, we have issues with respect to property damage. One example that we very often see is what happens if somebody says a tree is diseased and it needs to be taken down because it poses an injury to people in the community or the adjacent public road. In that situation, if the tree falls down as a result of the association not doing something, there's property damage and there won't be coverage. However, if the association is sued because it poses a risk and they're asked to change or remove that tree, they would be defended under a D&O policy because there's no property damage as of this point. So there are also some other issues that you have to be aware of. For example, with the breach of a third-party contract. The association will, in many cases, be defended in an action, but they will not be covered for any alleged damages as a result of the breach. Similar in a failure to maintain or obtain insurance situation where they may be defended as a result of their failure to get insurance, but the policy will not become the insurance they didn't get. These fall into a category of moral hazard, which we can't insure, and that would be the subject of a more lengthy discussion. And those are some of the key areas where insurance is not provided under the D&O policy.